for so long, I cannot tell how in my mind, at what moment in time, I woke up in this cell.
What the hell? I'm still alive. Oh man. Last thing I remember was the music, then It's still here. Okay, I'm done with being screwed around here. It's time to take action. So it looks like whatever the hell's keeping me alive doesn't want me dead, and it's doing whatever it is in its power to keep me here. So, until the threat decides to reveal itself, I think it's about time we got back to doing what I've always done. Let's rock. Shortly after the completion of Jak 3 and the departure of Naughty Dog's founders Jason Rubin and Andy Gavin, Naughty Dog began working on a secret project for Sony's up-and-coming console, the PlayStation 3, codenamed Big. Being developed 2 years in tandem with Jak X Combat Racing, Naughty Dog began to flesh out a concept for a more realistic setting with what they described to be a mixture between an Indiana Jones movie and a National Treasure movie. And in 2006, the first teaser trailers of Uncharted were unveiled to the public, where we got our first look at our everyman, then referred to as Dude Raider, running, jumping, and shooting at pirates on the hunt for some kind of lost treasure. But what truly captivated audiences back in 2006 was the visual prowess of Uncharted, as in how everything basically looks so realistic that the public began to draw comparisons between video games starting to look a lot like movies. I mean, sure, 10 years on, Uncharted might not be as mind-blowing to viewers of 2017, but still, I remember people talking about Uncharted being one of the most realistic-looking games of 2007. During development, the core focus of the main protagonist, Dude Raider, was to make him stand out against his video game contemporary, Lara Croft. And Naughty Dog achieved this by making Dude Raider an everyman. Instead of being a badass tough guy who chews up rocks and spits out gravel, Dude Raider was just an average guy whose tenacity and resourcefulness were his only means of getting out of trouble. And so on December 6, 2007, Uncharted Drake's Fortune was discovered by gamers across the world, with this little treasure turning 10 this year. And so my friend, let's go exploring into Uncharted territory with Uncharted Drake's Fortune. Our plot kicks off in the middle of the ocean, where budding journalist Elena Fisher is on the hunt for the coffin of Sir Francis Drake. Alongside her is treasure hunter and Dude Raider extraordinaire Nathan Drake, the descendant of the late Sir Francis Drake, who Drake digs up and is now given the honour of defiling his ancestor. To the shock of Elena, Francis's coffin is empty, and in the place of his body lies a journal, detailing something that Drake doesn't let Elena see. Interrupting our two little lovebirds here are pirates, and not of the feather sword variety.
Do you know how to use one of these?
Yeah, it's like a camera. You point and shoot, right?
If there's one point in this game's favour that I will bring up later on, it's that I really love Drake and Elena's interactions, and in this game it really goes to show how natural the chemistry is between the two. Despite Drake and Elena's best efforts, the pirates destroy the boat, with Drake and Elena's only option being to abandon ship. But of course we need our mix of thrilling drama to come into play, and of course in the case of this game it's Elena and her beloved camera. Because, as we all know, when faced with bloodthirsty pirates and exploding boats, any normal person's first instinct is to make sure that their camera's okay. You know, I say that as a joke, but in this day and age of social media, I wouldn't be entirely surprised if people find Elena's character quirk to not be too out of place. The two are then saved by Drake's good buddy, Victor Sullivan, in a plane that's so badass it could rival the Tornado called the Hog Wild. After returning to dry land, Drake informed Sullivan that Francis was onto something so big that his entire crew was sworn to secrecy, his maps, charts, and logbooks were all confiscated by the Queen of England to prevent Francis's discovery from getting out.
Just pretend for a minute that I don't really care about any of that stuff and cut to the chase, would you?
Okay then, I'll jump to the good part, just for you.
Ho ho ho.
Huh?
El goddamn Dorado.
With Drake and Sullivan seeing dollar signs in their eyes, their attention is then turned to Elena, who they decide to deal with in only the most respectful and polite manner they could possibly muster.
I promise you that... Son of a bitch. Hey! Should have seen that one coming.
Following the location written by Francis Drake, the two treasure hunters are then led to a jungle, obscuring a hidden temple, to find that all the gold that was there was picked clean centuries ago by the Spaniards, which Sullivan clearly doesn't take too well.
What the hell, Sully?
Nate, I'm not looking for a lousy piece of tin. I'm up to my eyeballs in debt.
Sullivan's going to die, isn't he? After exploring the hidden temple, Drake and Sullivan discover that the temple was apparently housing some kind of statue, leading to the discovery that El Dorado didn't mean the city of gold, but rather the Golden Man. The two find out that the Spanish had taken El Dorado from the temple, leading to a cold trail. However, their only lead now is to follow the tracks. The tracks lead Drake and Sullivan to the remains of a dilapidated German U-boat, hanging precariously over a waterfall. With Sullivan staying put, Drake gives him Francis's journal, and thus Drake climbs aboard the U-boat to see what the Nazis were up to. Within the derelict vessel, Drake finds nothing but dust and echoes, until he comes across one of the engineers holding a coin that originates from Spanish gold, bearing an unknown print mark. If that wasn't suspicious enough, Drake later finds the U-boat captain having apparently been torn to shreds. However, his decaying body does hold a Kriegsmarine map that contains coordinates that lead to where the Spaniards had taken El Dorado.
Nate, this better not be another wild goose chase. We've got to get something out of this trip
Or what?
As Drake goes out to see what happened to Sullivan, he accidentally sets off one of the torpedoes, which is surprisingly still active after a good 60 years of disuse. And of course, I think we all know what this means for Drake in this situation. Surfacing from the waterfall, we come to meet our two main antagonists of the game, Gabriel Roman and his lackey Navarro. They both explain that Sullivan owes Roman some money and has apparently tracked down the two treasure hunters after Sullivan spilled the beans about El Dorado to him. What happens as a result of all this is that Navarro takes the map. And given their current situation, I think we all know how this is going to turn out.
Sully! Sully! You son of a bitch!
Amidst all the running away, Drake discovers that Elena has apparently followed him, and as you'd expect, she greets him in only the most appropriate of manners.
That's for leaving me at the dock.
Drake quickly explains that Sullivan was killed, and upon their escape from Roman's men, lets Elena in on the location of El Dorado, teaming up with her with Drake looking for the treasure, and Elena looking for a story for her show. Looks like this is gonna be an adventure of fun. Taking the Wild Hog to an island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, Drake and Elena's wondrous journey is sadly short-lived.
Oh crap! We're on fire!
Enough with the damn camera! We gotta bail out!
Have you ever done this before?
Of course! You just jump, count to 5, and pull the cord! What am I doing? Okay, you just jump, count to 5, and pull the cord! Oh crap!
Normally I wouldn't let the scene play on for so long, but there's just so much for me to like about that scene. I mean, for one thing, there's the thrilling love triangle between Drake, Elena, and of course the dreaded camera. But then again, there's also their interactions, which feel ripped right out of a modern-day Indiana Jones movie. Not only that, but to top it all off, we get to see Drake panicking and having absolutely no idea what he's doing despite how he tried to reassure Elena earlier, by trying to give off the vibe that he's an experienced treasure hunter. It just hits all the right notes as far as character dynamics, tension, and action is concerned, and this is the kind of thing that Drake's fortune hits right on the head, leading to a great spirit of adventure to be found here. Drake later awakens to find A weeping angel? With his survival ensured for the time being, Drake now has to retrieve the map, find Elena, and avoid any pirates who tried to take him down. As Drake returns to the destroyed remains of the Hog Wild, he finds the map, but in turn also sees that Elena had parachuted right out into the middle of the pirates' stronghold. While also on the hunt for Elena, Drake continues to find more clues left behind by Francis Drake, as he comes across cryptic writings that show that Francis seemed to have more in his mind than El Dorado as far as the island was concerned. Making his way up the tower, Drake uses his ancestor's telescope to find out that the ships of both Drake's own crew and the Spaniards had been apparently sunk. Not only that, but Drake also scopes Elena, who appears to be getting some nice coverage of the island's verdant beauty, but like all things in life, this soon spirals into some explosive results.
Oh, crap.
Waking up in prison ends after sharing an admittedly cute but brief moment where Elena shares her knowledge of architecture. She concocts a plan to bust Drake out of prison, but before any of that can happen, we meet the leader of the pirates, Eddie Raja. To cut a long summary short, Eddie's a slimy cunt who wants Drake to lead him to El Dorado, which Drake obviously declines his offer, as of course he will probably shoot him the moment he leads him to the treasure. With some perfect timing on her part, Elena breaks down barriers between Drake and Eddie, and during the scuffle, Drake says his goodbyes in only the most appropriate of manners.
Thank you.
Hey! Damn it!
After an exciting chase scene, Drake and Elena are cornered between the edge of a cliff and Eddie's pirates, who confront Drake about how he might be working for somebody else and trying to screw Eddie out of El Dorado's fortune. With Eddie wanting the map, Drake and Elena take a dive as they propel the car down the cliff and escape from Eddie's forces. Upon their escape, Drake suddenly grows a conscience, surprisingly, and decides that both he and Elena should quit while they're ahead, considering the El Dorado treasure to not be worth dying over. But thanks to Elena's encouraging words, the two continue forth into the drowned city. Making their way to a records room, Drake and Elena uncover the ship's manifest from the Spaniards, containing mass amounts of gold, and one of them just being El Dorado. In turn, we also see another nice little moment where Drake explains that because he had Francis Drake's ring, he was able to find the location of his coffin off the coast of Panama, and in turn, that contained his motto: greatness from small beginnings. As Drake makes his way towards the boat, inches away from escaping the island, he's stopped by Elena, who desperately wants to show him something which she caught on camera, which is revealed to be that Gabriel, Roman, and Navarro are on the island, alongside a supposedly dead Victor Sullivan. Only adding to their dramas comes the thrilling plot point of dramatic tension of Elena being forced to choose Nathan Drake or her beloved camera.
You've got to let it go!
Damn it!
Okay,
Oh, shit!
it's okay. Come on.
Drake might sound concerned, but that's really just because he eliminated his only rival for Elena's heart. After Drake and Elena make their way up north, things begin to get a little bit more ambient, for the lack of a better word.
Ages ago? My God! That's disgusting. Oh, I wish I had my camera.
Yes, because I'm sure most television networks would televise actual death on air. Anyway, the creepiest thing about the trap is that it wasn't made by the Spanish from centuries ago. Instead, the trap was made recently, as the spikes were cobbled together using the wreckage of Sullivan's plane, the Hog Wild. And it's here where our pants-shitting moment begins to kick in, because it's not only Drake, Eddie, and Roman's forces on the island. Something far more terrifying is at work here. After battling their way through Roman's forces, Drake and Elena track down Sullivan's location, and we then see the Chekhov's gun that led to Sullivan's survival.
Huh? No way! Old Francis took a bullet for you.
Look, I'm not exactly the kind of person that likes to nitpick fun-filled adventure games like this, but I find it a little hard to believe that a small book could stop a bullet at point-blank range. Sullivan explains that he managed to convince Roman to keep him alive so that he would then lead them to the El Dorado treasure, when in actuality he was just misleading them until Drake and Elena showed up to his rescue. Sullivan then tells Drake and Elena that Francis had hidden treasure beneath the very monastery that they're standing on, marked beneath a symbol with 2 keys and a heart signifying his treasure vault. With our 3 heroes united, they come across a secret entrance where Drake opts to go inside alone, despite many of Roman's men still roaming about the place, with another one of my favourite Nathan Drake moments of the entire game.
Be careful.
Come on. I always am.
Ah! I did not see that!
While scampering around the catacombs, Drake overhears a conversation between Roman and Eddie, revealing that those two were in cahoots with one another all along. Were being the provocative word here. Roman appears dissatisfied with Eddie's performance in eliminating Drake, with Eddie adamantly defending his position, claiming that there's more than just Drake taking out his forces, and that leads to a falling out between the two. Finally, all my Indonesian linguistic skills can finally be put to use. With Eddie storming off, we see Roman and Navarro appearing to be the evil variants of our two heroes, and we get a slight hint at how Navarro was seemingly taken in by Roman, but unlike his associate, Navarro seems to be a little bit more intent on obtaining El Dorado, despite Roman's contrary opinion that it's more trouble than it's probably worth. The three treasure hunters reunite in the mausoleum, only to be separated after the passageway is blocked off by a stone wall, with Sullivan making his way back to the library, and Drake and Elena being forced to travel through the underground passages. Drake and Elena eventually stumble across a rather melancholy discovery when they reach inside the treasure vault to find nothing more than the decaying corpse of Sir Francis Drake lying inside.
So much for greatness. Wasted his life. For nothing.
Funny, I get the exact same feeling that those same words are going to be put on my tombstone when I die. Interrupting Drake's little family reunion is Eddie, who busts in after being chased by something after he sealed up the entrance to the tomb. Scared out of his wits, Drake and Eddie find themselves pitted against cannibalistic creatures looking like an emaciated zombie, who will later come to be known as the Descendants. With Eddie becoming lunch for the Descendants, Drake and Elena make their escape, locking themselves in an abandoned U-boat docking station, tying back to how the Nazis were also on the hunt for El Dorado. Elena finds out that the Nazis had recovered El Dorado from Francis's treasure vault, and had moved the statue to somewhere beneath the monastery, with Drake and Elena's only mission now to make it to the surface by restoring power to the elevator. So now it's up to Drake to go through the abandoned Nazi facility and restore power to the area. Which, if you thought crawling around a dark abandoned Nazi bunker wasn't bad enough, the entire place is crawling with Descendants. And this place still scares the bloody shit out of me to this very day. I'm serious, ever since playing Drake's Fortune way back when it came out, this area scared me so much that, to me, it puts most horror games to shame. I mean, hell, it even left me with wanting Naughty Dog to make a survival horror game. Sorry, I mean a survival horror game that doesn't suck. Anyway, after restoring power to the elevator, Drake stumbles across an old film projector, playing a reel which showcases something truly terrifying.
Achtung! This is the Gestapo! You have to pay your telephone bill! If not, I will call you again the day after tomorrow!
Okay, that didn't happen, but what we do see instead is the effects of the El Dorado curse upon one of the Nazi soldiers. Also within the room is a letter by Francis Drake, his last words detailing about how the Descendants are actually descended from the Spaniards who fell victim to El Dorado's curse, seemingly possessed by the treasure. With his men all murdered by the Descendants, Francis destroys the ships of his and the Spaniard origin, drowning the city to prevent El Dorado from ever being discovered again, and fighting to his dying breath to ensure that the world would never know the curse of El Dorado. Making his way back to Elena, Drake finds out that Roman and his goons have Elena taken hostage, and if that wasn't bad enough, Roman now knows where El Dorado is. Upon escaping from the bunker, Drake and Sullivan converge, heading beneath the church where they travel under a secret passageway leading to El Dorado. Drake and Sullivan are quickly apprehended by Roman's forces, as it seems all is lost as Roman finally has El Dorado in his possession.
That is only a shell. Open it!
This doesn't sound like a trap at all. Roman opens the sarcophagus to reveal a decayed body who exhausts some kind of spore-like oxidant into the air, gagging Roman as he desperately seals the body back inside before turning feral like the Descendants. And here's our surprise villain, ladies and gentlemen, Navarro, the guy who barely got any screen time up until this point. I'll comment on this a little bit later when the story segment's all wrapped up, but just to give a little teaser to my thoughts, Navarro's betrayal feels a little bit ham-fisted. Anyway, Drake tries to deter Navarro from taking the treasure after having seen its effects on the Spaniards, only for Navarro to cast aside Drake's warning, saying that for the right buyer, the El Dorado treasure would be worth a fortune. Dare I say, a Drake's fortune. As if Navarro taking El Dorado wasn't enough, the place is quickly overrun by the Descendants, overpowering Navarro's men, with Drake and Sullivan in a mad dash to stop him and save Elena. Drake manages to leap onto the El Dorado treasure as it's being airlifted out, and being transported to a ship off the coast of the island. All the while, Drake is under fire. Elena, managing to kick the shooter out of the chopper, by mere happenstance, shoots the pilot in a situation so outlandish I can't help but think of Resident Evil 2. The chopper then comes crashing down, with Drake and Navarro going at it head-on-head in the final battle. With Navarro down for the count, Drake pulls out an unconscious Elena out of the chopper, only to find that Navarro was still standing and ready for round 2. Unfortunately for him, however, Navarro's desire for profit always keeps dragging him down.
Adios, asshole.
With El Dorado sinking back into the depths and Navarro dead, Sullivan shows up in a boat with Drake and Elena lamenting upon their adventure, with Elena revealing that she kept Francis Drake's ring for him all along. And thus, our heroes sail off triumphantly as the game ends. If there was any way I could sum up my thoughts on Uncharted Drake's Fortune story, it'd honestly be that it's an adventure. I mean, this game really has everything that you could really want out of an adventure movie. Action, tension, a little pinch of romance, adventure, ancient treasures, mystical evil, and scary as fuck descendant creatures, crushed ass with a sense of fun, and overall, a joy with a great spirit of adventure to it. Overall, I had fun with Uncharted's story. I mean, I like the characters and their chemistry together, Drake makes for an easily relatable protagonist, Sullivan and Elena both make for great foils to Drake, and as far as antagonists go, they're pretty okay, save for Roman and Navarro, for reasons that I'll get into now. My only real problem with Navarro and Roman is that their presence in the game comes off as too little too late. I mean, they're established quickly on in Chapter 3 as our antagonists, which will be fine since their performance in parallel to Drake and Sullivan make for a decent villain screen presence, but hindering that is when we reach the island and then the focus is given to Eddie and his band of pirates. Now, again, I'm not sure if this is just Naughty Dog wanting to show off their pirate models after the beginning of the game, or if there was going to be something more done with Eddie, but either way, to me, it just greatly reduces the emotions and build-up that I should have been feeling throughout the beginning of the game, especially after Sullivan's fake death. Again, it's a minor thing, but one that I feel would have given Roman and Navarro a little bit more time to develop their motivations, and give a little bit more time to see Navarro's seething resentment of Roman. Over to the gameplay side of things, right off the bat, I can say that Drake controls quite fluidly. If I could put it in brief as to how Drake functions gameplay-wise, I'd honestly describe it as how a human could act at peak physical condition. He can jump, scale across ledges, and crawl across platforms by pressing the X button, and by using the analog stick, you can manipulate Drake's direction to go wherever you want to climb and jump. The climbing here, seen in Drake's Fortune, flows fluidly, and its leaps and bounds above some of its parkour contemporaries like Assassin's Creed's sluggish climbing controls. This, combined with Drake's mastery over a variety of firearms, do well to inject a dose of action into the mix of tomb raiding and exploration. You can fire your weapons by holding R1, reload by pressing R2, and aim using L1. In the case of handling things like grenades, you can also use the 6-axis to arc your throws to a trajectory of your liking. Gunplay is responsive, and the many weapons you use, including a vast range of pistols, shotguns, machine guns, and grenade launchers, all handle quite well, so the player shouldn't find any weapon more difficult to use than the other. As far as any other gameplay element is concerned, there are two minor segments involving the use of Drake operating a chain gun and driving a jet ski. The chain gun functions akin to the normal weapons of the game. However, you also have grenades as a little bit of extra firepower in case things get a little bit too hot. And the jet ski controls decently, with a bit of added bonus of Elena handling your weapon, which you can switch for her and Drake seamlessly by pressing L1 and then R1 to fire the weapon. In terms of mission structure, your objectives are based upon the events happening in the story, which in the case of Drake's Fortune involves three key gameplay elements: exploration, puzzle solving, and third-person shooter action. The exploration segments typically involve Drake wandering through jungles and ancient temples, observing and traversing across the ruins, as he sees the remnants of Spaniards, Nazis, and the effect that El Dorado had on the locations seen in the game, all of which really do well to enhance the experience. I mean, this in part might count as a bit of a technical aspect thing, but this element really made me feel like I'm a treasure hunter and I'm travelling across these areas. Puzzle solving mostly comprised of pushing plates into their depressions in the right order, or rotating sigils and cranks, all of which, while not exactly requiring you to be a super genius to complete, are still decently challenging enough to make them feel like they're worth being there. And lastly, of course, is the third-person shooter aspect, which is what takes up a majority of the game. For those of you unfamiliar with Uncharted's style of gunplay, think Gears of War in the sense that Drake's Fortune will usually have Drake and his enemies hiding in and out of cover in a war of attrition to conserve and use your weapons, ammo, and ingenuity to your advantage as you outfox your enemies. For example, one such tactic you can use is to throw a grenade towards your enemy and quickly follow up with some blind fire in the grenade's general direction so that they'll have no time to get away from the blast radius. And if there's one thing I can comment about the gameplay aspect, it'd be for how decent the enemy AI is. The enemy will duck in and out of cover when they're trying to shoot at you, work in tandem with shotgun wielders when in a small group, and advance upon you and take risks when they feel that you have you outnumbered, and overall, I generally find that the AI is pretty well thought out, and as far as making the enemies seem, well, a little bit more human, honestly. One critique that I do have with the third-person shooter sections is, of course, the overabundance of them. Don't get it twisted, the third-person shooter gameplay in and of itself is fine, and there's a lot that makes it feel rather intuitive for the player's ability to think about how they approach the situation in a firefight. However, part of me does feel as if the game relies a little bit too heavily on this segment for its own good. A general rule of thumb I picked up over playing Drake's Fortune is that the moment I see any pillars or crumbled walls that I could hide behind, I was almost immediately clued in as to how I'd be ambushed by a group of enemies later on. And I can understand from the prospect of a video game perspective that it's done to give the player something to do and keep the flow of action in tandem with exploration and puzzle solving, but to me, it came to a point where these aspects began to get rather tedious. Not to mention, especially as these segments came on later in the game, I feel as if the lack of enemies, whether they be Eddie's pirates or Roman's forces, they would have made the horror aspect of the Descendants feel that much more terrifying in the sense that you're walking through an area which even Roman and Eddie's men dare not tread. But that's just me seeing it on more of a psychological level rather than seeing it as just a pure video game. But once again, I will reiterate, I'm not saying the third-person shooter sections are bad or that they're the weakest link in the game. It's just that at times they feel as if they were just there to pad out game time. Overall, the gameplay of Uncharted Drake's Fortune manages to keep a decent balance between action, exploration, and puzzle solving, albeit a tad too reliant on the action sequences, but nevertheless, they all coalesce into a perfect formula that really do make you feel as if you're on an adventure. Onto the technical aspects, and Uncharted Drake's Fortune still looks pretty stellar 10 years on. Graphically speaking, although that does show its age a little in its character models, I feel as if the right amount of detail put into them, as well as the environments combined with a good use of lighting and shadows, makes Drake's Fortune look visually breathtaking to say the least. Another point in the game's favour would be the cinematic qualities of the game, and its use of combining set pieces and the action scene in the gameplay segments with moments that feel ripped right out of an adventure movie. Whether it be running away from crumbling ruins or Descendants, or being chased by pirates through the jungle, Uncharted Drake's Fortune is chockers with these set pieces, and they really do well to enhance the experience and get that adrenaline pumping. As for the soundtrack, massive praise to Greg Edmondson because the music in Drake's Fortune is fantastic. Ranging from adventurous and thrilling to somber and ambient, the orchestral score suits the mood quite well and has a very nice tribal twist to it, with my favourite track in the game being this little piano piece heard in the German U-boat in Chapter 3. Another thing to talk about, as I touched upon in the story segment, is the writing of the game. Several times throughout the game, whenever I found myself in a situation that came across as frustrating or overbearing, Drake's lines of dialogue during the gameplay would oftentimes reflect my thoughts as to whenever he made a remark about them. Not only that, but as I also brought up, I really love the character interactions in the game, and it's the small moments like this to me which really make these characters feel very three-dimensional. But I digress, so ultimately, I'd just like to give credit where credit is due for Amy Henrig's excellent scriptwriting on Drake's Fortune. One last thing I think I should give praise to is the performances of the cast who mocapped and voiced the characters, such as Nolan North as Nathan Drake, Emily Rose as Elena Fisher, and Richard McGonigal as Victor Sullivan. They all bring a level of charm to their retrospective characters, and it looks as if they had a lot of fun in their roles, which only further adds to the amount of passion that they put into their work. And so, with all that said, what are my final thoughts on Uncharted Drake's Fortune? Uncharted Drake's Fortune to me is a game that perfectly translates an adventure movie into video game form. It has a great cast of characters, a compelling mystery, lots of action, gripping tension, occasional monsters that'll make you shit your pants, but overall, there is a great spirit of adventure to be found here. For what few problems I have with Uncharted Drake's Fortune personally, I can look past them because at the end of the day, this game portrays itself in a way that I can't help but get swept up in the thrilling joyride of action set pieces and the trance-like wonder of exploring into these ancient civilizations. Uncharted Drake's Fortune knows when to balance serious drama and angst with a sense of vigor and fun that leaves the player knowing that despite all the danger and all the obstacles thrown their way, with enough wit, brains and cunning, you're in for the trip of a lifetime. In terms of recommendations, if you're looking at a game that's essentially an adventure movie akin to Indiana Jones meets National Treasure, then I think Uncharted Drake's Fortune is a game that you should quickly uncover before the Spaniards get ya. And as for me, Uncharted Drake's Fortune is a game that I can only ever describe as nothing short of fantastic. So on that note, I'm Skully, keeping new metal, and... Jesus! Well, viewers, here we go again.
That
Amidst all the running array, raggy. And if there's one point from the gameplay aspect that I can comment about,